Would you please turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Matthew in chapter 22. Turn with me to Matthew 22, and when you find it, if you would read with me, please, verses 37 to 39. Matthew 22, 37 to 39. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Turn next with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 20. And we're going to read verses 13 to 17. Exodus 20, verses 13 to 17. And when you found it, read along with me. Verse 13. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at the first 5 commandments that were given to the Israelites. And in summary, these 5 commandments, they teach us, they were given to us to teach us and to show us how to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind. Now, this is given to us as a readjustment, a restoration, or a reboot, if you will, to use technical terms, to bring us back to our original design, what we were made for, right? First commandment, first of all, bring us back to only one God, because we have many gods in our lives. God says this is not what you were made for, so he wants to bring us back to having only one God. And then, in having only one God, put it into practice. You should not worship idols or any images made in anything carved in the image of things, right? So not only in spirit having only one God, but in practice having only one God. And not just having one God in practice, but also in your attitude, having a heart of reverence for the Lord by not taking his name in vain, right? Speak with purpose when you use his name. And you not only have that reverence in your speech, but take it into everyday practice in trusting and obeying God by keeping the Sabbath holy. And finally, in recognizing God's authority, we are told and taught to honor and obey your parents. Right? And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, that honoring and obeying your parents is actually an act of worship, but that's what it is. It is our recognizing God's sovereignty in our lives. We do that by honoring and obeying our parents. Now, note this, right? There's 3, for lack of a better word, there's 3 resources with which we have been called to love the Lord our God. First is the heart, then the soul, and then the mind. And many times what happens is, as we discover Jesus, as we discover his word, and as we discover who God is, we respond and we want to love God. But what we respond with first is our mind. We devote ourselves to the study, to the learning, to understanding, to furthering our knowledge, none of which is wrong, because we are called to love the Lord with our mind. But what is first? First, love the Lord your God with all your heart. The heart has to come first. And so the question then is, what is the heart? What does it mean to love the Lord with all your heart? It means to love God with all your mental and physical power, with all your faculties that you possess, to love him supremely, more than any other being, more than any other thing, with all the passion possible that you have. You can't love God with more than you have, right? You know, people will say, I agree with you 150%. You can't agree with me 150%. 100% is the maximum, right? Love God with 100% of what you have. What you have may not be as much as someone else. Doesn't matter. Your 100% is what God is looking for. But 100% of your heart, of your passion, to love him with all your heart is to love him more strongly than anyone or anything else, and being willing to give up everything at his command. That is how we love the Lord our God with all our heart. What then? The next thing is, what then is a soul? What does it mean to love the Lord with all your soul? The soul, the word soul here, it is life. It is your life. To love the Lord your God with all your soul means that you are willing to give up your life for the Lord. Now, every time we talk about giving up our life for the Lord, we always jump to the extremes. Oh, the Lord's calling me to die. Like, the Lord is calling me to go to the Amazons and be eaten by cannibals as a way, right? Yes, that has happened. These are true stories, and people have given their lives in the mission of bringing the Word of God to those who are lost. But to love the Lord your God with all your life means you're willing to give up all aspects of your life, right? The things that you want to do with your life, whatever it is that your will is, your days, your moments, the decisions that you make, being willing to give all of that up to God. Now, that's not to say you sit there and say, God, it's yours, make my decisions for me. But make your decisions in the Lord. Make your choices in the Lord. Your life would be His. Love Him with all your soul, with all your life. Devote all of that to Him, to His service. And then lastly, we come to our mind, to submit your intellect to God's will. That's how you love the Lord with all your mind. To submit all your mental capacities to His guidance. Let Him guide your thoughts and what you think about. To devote all of your intellectual pursuits and efforts to Him. Right? That's God's commandment to you and to me, to love Him with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So that's the last 3 weeks, right? An encapsulation is just a quick summary of the last 3 weeks. So, what is this week then? This week, Jesus says the second commandment is like the first. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, right? And here we have an issue, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, our self, we know, we've been talking about this a lot. The self is one of the biggest problems, right? Our self, the self-love that we have, there is an aspect of it that is corrupt, and it is at the root of many of our greatest sins. And that is a self, an aspect of ourself and our self-love that needs to be dealt with, which needs to be brought to the Lord. And that's why we sing, less of me and more of you, Jesus. I want there to be a reduction in this self-love. But there is another aspect of self-love, and that is our duty, our responsibility to maintain our well-being, the well-being of our souls, of our bodies, to take care of ourselves. That love which we exercise to make sure that we are well, right? That is an aspect of our self-love which is not corrupt. But that is an aspect of our self-love which we, I think, take very seriously. I think we all go to very great lengths to make sure that we take care of ourselves, that we are caring for ourselves. And that's what we're called to do, is with that same love that we love ourselves, to use His love to love our neighbors. Love your neighbor as yourself. To love our neighbors as truly and as sincerely as we love ourselves. And there will be times in obeying this call that you will be called to sacrifice and deny yourself for the good of others. Right? Now, what do the commandments, the last 5 commandments, what do they say about loving our neighbors? We saw in Exodus 20, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his servants, his ox, his donkeys, or anything. Right? So it's very straightforward. Right? It's 5 rules, very straightforward, very easy to apply, right? Remember, we're called to love the Lord our God with all our hearts. And then lastly, with all our mind, right? So if we come first like the Pharisees did, with our mind, and look at these 5 commandments, we can reduce it to just those 5 simple commands and 5 things that you are not supposed to do, right? We will reduce these great commandments into 5 simple rules in our lives. That is if we come first with loving the Lord our God with our minds. And the Pharisees made this mistake. Right? They loved God, or so they thought. They focused on loving God with their mind, and they totally missed the heart. And Jesus addresses this in the Sermon on the Mount. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. When you found passage, Matthew chapter 5, we're going to read a bunch from Matthew. Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. Read along with me. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I, Jesus, he says, but I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Right? Verse 22, that I that Jesus says, that is an emphatic I. He's saying, this is what the commandments taught you. Right? You have the scriptures, you have the law. This is what it says. I, Jesus, I am telling you, I am expounding on this law. I am opening your mind to see what this law is teaching you. So what's Jesus saying here? If your obedience to this commandment, to not murder, is strictly adhering only to the physical act of murder, Jesus says, then you've missed the point. You have missed the point of this commandment. Right? If you're angry, look at what Jesus says. If you're angry with your brother without a cause. If you're angry with your brother without a cause, you are in danger of the judgment. It is just the same as if you had physically taken someone's life. And I don't know if we've ever thought about this when we lose our tempers without cause. When we lose our tempers, when we lose our cool without cause. Jesus says, you've just as good as murdered someone. Right? And so if you're only looking at the commandment and the exact text, you've missed what Jesus is trying to show us. He's saying, look, you're angry without just cause. You as good as murder. If you say to your brother, Raka, what is Raka? It's a term of scorn, of contempt. I don't know what a modern day equivalent is. And I think nowadays we are so casual with put-downs, right? Where the put-downs themselves have lost meaning. We're so casual in calling someone a nincompoop or a blockhead. Am I allowed to say that? Is that bad? Like, it's not. Well, see, it's not too terrible a word in our minds because it's become so commonplace, right? But the term raka, a term of scorn and contempt, when you say that to a brother, when you have contempt for a brother, what's your attitude toward him? You're despising him. You are despising a brother who is made in the image of God. That is a person standing there, a living image of God. He was made in the image of God, and you are despising him. Right? And you've let whatever motivated you to utter this insult to become of more importance and to cloud your judgment and to blind you to the relationship that exists between you and a brother. This is a relationship that was purchased by the blood of Christ. And so we, in that moment, are willing to throw that away, and in despising the brother, you are despising the blood of Christ that had brought us together to be brother and sister. Don't do this with sisters either, right? But within the body of Christ, this body was brought to us by the blood of Christ. And so in despising someone, Jesus says, don't do that. Well, what happens if you say to your brother Raka? Then you would have to face the council. You're in danger of the council. What is the council? The council consisted of 72 judges that were made up of chief priests and elders of the people and the scribes, and they held authority over life and death. Right? If you say these words of contempt to a brother, you are liable to come before the council that could decide your fate. That's how serious this is. Now next, if you say to your brother, you fool. Right? Again, another term that's really lost a lot of weight, right? We're so easy to say, man, what a fool, right? What does it mean? What does it mean to call someone a fool? This word, this term, you fool, it implies that this person is utterly godless, and this person is devoid of intellectual wisdom. Right? Now it is not just a term of contempt, of scorn, of despising. Now you're talking about having an utter hatred. You are saying, By saying someone is a fool, you are saying you are empty of what would make you a person. You are not even worth being a person, right? And this utter hatred, again, is directed toward a brother who is made in the image of Christ. And look what happens if you say this. You are in danger of hellfire. Now, this is not speaking of hellfire as in eternal damnation. This hellfire that Jesus speaks of here, it is a fire that burns in the valley of Hinnom, where back in the day when Israelites used to practice idolatry, they used to bring children there. Not to worship together, but they would bring children there to sacrifice to the god Moloch as a human sacrifice. This was where they burned children as sacrifices in their idolatrous worship. And in this time, this valley was a detested place, so it was turned into a landfill, if you will, where they dumped carcasses and all the filth that would come out of the city. So this place, it's disgusting, it's nasty, it's full of pestilence. And to keep this disgustingness at bay and from spreading, there is a constant fire that is always burning to burn up all this rubbish. And Jesus says, if you said to someone, you fool, you are in danger of being burned in this always burning fire in the valley of Hinnom, right? And so this is what's waiting for you if you call your brother a fool. And so Jesus is demonstrating to us, he says, you shall not murder. It's not just about a physical act of taking someone's life. As bad as that is, yes, don't do that. But this commandment to not murder, if you want to get at the heart of it, it encompasses much more than a physical act, but it's what is in your heart toward your brother. And so God, in giving us his commandment, what is his desire? What is his end game? He wants to restore our relationship with one another to what he had intended to be. He didn't want us to continue being like the first brothers, Cain and Abel. You know the story of Cain and Abel. One of them didn't make it. Well, they both died eventually. But one of them, Cain, killed his brother Abel. And this is not what we are called to be. He wants us to be new brothers, firstborns together with Christ. There is a relationship of love. And God's intent in commanding us to not murder one another is not just about preservation of life, but to bring us back to his command where he says, love one another. Right? This is what we were made for. Love one another as he has loved us. Right? Now, next one, what about adultery? Matthew chapter 5, 27 to 28 says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Adultery is defined as marital relations outside of marriage. Right? So, Jesus explains, though, that it's not about just what you do physically. Adultery is not confined to what you do physically. It's what's in your heart. Jesus wants us, each and every one of us, to be satisfied with the spouse that we have. Or if you're not married, he wants you to be satisfied with waiting for the spouse that you will have and being satisfied with your singleness at that time. He wants to bring us back to that place of being satisfied with what he has ordained for us. Whether you're married already, or you're going to be married, or I don't know, maybe you have that special call to never be married. Whatever the case is, be satisfied with what God has provided, what he has called you to. If you're married, be happy with your God-given wife. If you're not married, be satisfied and happy with your singlehood right now. If you're married and she's married, but you're not married to each other, then don't be happy with each other. Go home and be happy with your respective spouse. Right? That's what God's calling us to. And once you do this, once you open yourself to indulge and satisfy whatever dissatisfactions you have, you've opened yourself up now to grumbling about God's providence. God, whatever you've given me isn't good enough for me right now. Whatever you've given me, it seemed right at the time, but God, maybe you didn't know better. It's not working out. Right? And so we start to question God, and not only is that hurting our relationship with God and our trusting of his providence and his omniscience and knowing all that we need, but we are bringing harm to others. If you're stepping outside of the marriage, you're hurting your wife. If you're stepping into someone else's marriage, you are hurting that relationship, that marriage. If you're not married and she's not married, you are hurting your future spouses. You are bringing damage. God says, I don't want you to bring harm to yourself. I don't want you to cross boundaries, not because I don't want you to have fun, but I want to protect you. And so love one another, but not like that, okay? Outside of these proper relationships, don't go there. Next commandment, don't steal. And the last commandment, don't covet. I'm taking these out of order, and you'll see why in a minute. Stealing. Stealing is taking what is not yours. Coveting is wanting what is not yours. And I would argue many times coveting would lead to stealing. Or worse, right? David and Bathsheba. Look what he did to Bathsheba's husband. It led to a murder, right? Stealing and coveting both root from not being satisfied with what you have. I think these are all very closely related. You're not happy with whatever circumstance God's placed you in. You're not happy with what God has provided. You're not happy with what you have in your hand, and you have a desire for something else. Right? It starts with a desire. I see something, I don't have it, he has it, I want it. Well, let's fix that problem. I'm going to reach out, apply the 5-finger discount. Now it's mine. Right? In stealing, you are bringing financial and material harm to others. Someone else is suffering a loss. Right? A friend of mine recently was asking his friends on Facebook. He said he had ordered something from Amazon and it never showed up. And so he complained to Amazon, and Amazon's great. This is not a commercial for Amazon, but Amazon's great. Amazon said, well, we're sorry, you probably got lost, so they sent him another item. 2 days later, 2 of the same items showed up. And so he posed the question, what do I do with the extra? Right? Now, Amazon actually does have an option to return the item, and the option is, I received an extra one that I didn't pay for, if you're honest. Right? And many of his friends actually said, keep it, because Jeff Bezos is so rich he won't notice it. Right? It doesn't matter if the person actually doesn't notice what they're missing, right? It's not, yes, there is many times there is a harm, a material harm that comes to someone. But even if there is no tangible material harm, you still need to do what's right. Because again, it comes back to your heart. You are showing God, God, you didn't give me enough. And so I need to take from someone who had more. God, I think you misappropriated. I think some more of that wealth was supposed to come my way. You are grumbling against God. When you steal and you covet, you're letting your desires for material goods define and drive you. Right? What does Jesus say about it? He says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Don't steal. Don't covet, because guess what? All this stuff that you want, that you don't have, that's driving you, that's defining who you are, that's occupying your thoughts, all of this that you find yourself wanting, it's all going to go away. It's all going to decompose, break down, become useless and meaningless to you one day. Right? Where's your heart? Are you going to put your heart in this bunch of trivial things that you want to steal and you want to covet, or do you want to put your heart in heaven, put your treasure in heaven, right? And so Jesus says, don't be driven by these things that don't last, right? He says, no one can serve 2 masters. No one can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon being money, and in relation to that, all material things. If you let your desire for things, for money, for wealth, whatever, drive you to covet and steal, that's now become your God. And now you're violating the first commandment. Again, we're coming full circle. You shall have only one God. Right? In these commandments, God is teaching us how to have only one God. how to live that out practically in our actions and in our attitudes. Right? Why let something, Jesus is saying, why let something that's going to rot, why let something that's going to rot ruin your relationship with God and your relationship with your fellow man? Don't go there. Come back to what you were designed to do. Let your focus be on God. Now, I know I did these out of order, right? So now we come back to the 9th commandment. The 9th commandment says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Don't lie against your neighbor, right? And many people will condense this commandment to basically saying, don't lie, which I'll explain in a minute. It's the same. When you lie against someone, when you bear false witness, right, you're bearing a false witness, you're giving a false account of what happened. When you lie against someone, you are robbing them of the truth that should have governed their life and their situation at that moment. You are actually taking something away from someone when you lie against them, right? For example, if a car gets stolen and you bear false witness and you say falsely that your neighbor stole it, you're bringing a lot of harm because you cast an undeserved guilt and all its associated punishment on a neighbor, assuming that he becomes convicted. Conversely, if you saw your neighbor, right, we always think lying to bring someone harm is only one direction. If you saw your neighbor stealing a car, and you bear false witness against him, and I'll tell you why this is against him, not for him. If you see your neighbor stealing a car and you bear false witness against him and say he didn't do it and so he gets away scot-free, many of us in this culture, we say, I lied for him. You didn't lie for him, you lied against him. Why? Because he didn't get what was coming to him and he needed what was coming to him. He needed to be corrected. He needed to be set back on the right path because he gets away with stealing this car. Guess what? You may have very well just sent him down the road of a lifetime of stealing cars. And worse, right? You steered him away from what is right. You've stolen what was rightfully his, and that is to be brought back to the right path, to be punished, not for the sake of punishment, but to be restored again to the rightful place in his life and what he should be doing as a member of society. In bearing false witness against someone, you've taken that away from him. Right? Now, lying, there are times, right? There are times where we can say, what if I'm not lying against someone? Right? This command is very specific. It says I shouldn't bear false witness against my neighbor. And so if there is no target, so to speak, if there is no neighbor that I'm bearing false witness against, then there's no victim, and so there's no crime, right? Well, in uttering something false, what you're doing is you're deciding to play God. You're deciding to play God because you are saying, I am going to decide a new reality. What was true, you are saying, we're going to discard it, and I am going to replace that with my version of the truth, my version of reality, and you are the victim. You are the victim because you've somehow started to think you can't be God, and you've misaligned yourself with God. And so, in lying, even if there is no direct target that you lied against, you're lying against yourself, and you're lying against God. Right? And so in all of this is why, in all of this, God's calling us to love ourselves to love our neighbors as ourselves, because He wants to restore us to our original function again, ultimately to love Him. Right? In all of these commandments, God is showing us to love Him. And that's why when Jesus was asked, what is the great commandment? He answered that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then he says, that's the first and great commandment. And the second, he didn't say the second is lesser than it. He said the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. This second commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself, is like the first commandment, because in loving your neighbor as yourself, you are also loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And this is the great point at which I can say this commandment is here to show us that it is impossible and futile to obey all the commandments, and it is to direct us to Jesus. And that is true. That is true. But I think we've focused enough on that aspect of the commandments already. What I want to focus on this morning is we, in the culmination of loving our neighbor as ourselves and loving God, we are being called to go out and demonstrate who God is. We are being called to go out and live a life that would honor and glorify God. And we are called to go out and bring our neighbor to salvation. Yes, we are called to love and glorify and worship the Lord. But many times that happens, it culminates in bringing someone to salvation. And that's what we're here to do, is it not? To be channels only, Jesus. To be your channel. Well, what does Jesus come to do? He's come to bring salvation to all who will believe unto him. And so we would say, Jesus, I am willing to be your channel. I am willing to be your channel, flowing not with my power, not with my might, but with yours. Use me. And as I obey these commandments, I live out you, Jesus. I live out your character. I live out everything that defines you, and I live out your love for me, your concern for me, your wanting to bring me back to my original purpose. And as I live that out, then others can see who you are. And what greater love is there than showing someone the way to Jesus? If you care for people, show them Jesus. Bring them to salvation. What better way to love and glorify God than to point to Jesus and to proclaim He's the one, He's the way, He's the truth, He's the life. Right? We're 1 week away from Christmas, where we are in Advent season. And I really pray today, as we look to Jesus, as we look to His coming again, as we look to Jesus, and as we commemorate His coming to us, the Word became flesh. I pray this morning, I pray that we would really strive to get to the heart of the commandments, and that is Jesus Himself. Jesus is at the heart of the commandments. In looking at the commandments, there was a reason we studied the commandments in the weeks leading up to Christmas. This is our Advent season, looking at the commands that God gave to us, and seeing Jesus at the very heart of it. Let us bow our heads to pray. Jesus, I thank you, Lord. I thank you again for the commandments that you give us. I thank you for all that you teach us, and I thank you, Lord, for your heart for us that is seen and so clearly evident in the commandments. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us to follow these commandments. It is hard, and it is nigh impossible. But Jesus, help us to do our best, Lord. And as we follow what you have commanded us, may these actions, may these things that we do change us, Lord, and show you to everyone around us. I pray these things in Jesus' name.